Thank you. There's my disclosure. Nobody gives me money. I wish they would, though. I'm going to talk about, my talk's going to be very different from the previous talks. Mostly what my talk is concerned with is how to get people to like things that they originally don't like by using things other than modifying the product. In particular, we know that, as some of the other speakers said, people actually like bitter things, like IPAs, for example, one of my favorites. But what I'm going to talk about are mechanisms by which we can actually influence how much somebody likes a food, particularly foods that they originally find bitter. So all those things are bitter, and all those things are liked very much by a number of people, or very many people. So one of the big bitter foods that we want people to get to like a little bit more than they do are, of course, vegetables. So I'm going to be talking about that quite a bit. There's a lot of mechanisms. I'm a psychologist. So I study behavior and why people eat what they eat, and why they like the foods they like. So I'm going to talk about a couple of mechanisms that we know that influence how much people like a particular food. The first one is mere exposure. And that is basically increased likings of food with increased exposure or tasting of them. So Gary talked about basically exposing people in utero, but it's also been found that children with repeated exposures to food will get to like the food. Adults with repeated exposures to a food will increase their liking for the food. It seems like somewhere between 5 and 10 exposures is the magic number to see any kind of shift. But the challenge is getting them to eat something that often, right? And they don't have to eat it a lot, but they do have to taste it. So that's the big challenge. I'm currently working with a chef in Philadelphia, Mark Vetri, who has a nonprofit foundation. And he goes into schools, and what we're doing is we're using his Eatiquette program and to try to get inner city kids in Philadelphia, and there's some of them, to eat vegetables and eat healthy. And the Eatiquette program has a lot of different components to it. So he actually puts a chef in the kitchen, in the lunchroom, and so they have their own recipes, and the lunch is actually tasty, which helps. The kids are table captains. They talk about the food. There's always an adult at the table. They used to, and I'll get back to this, serve the fruit as a dessert course, so they actually had a coursed meal. And the kids clear and clean the table, and it's actually a fairly nice environment that they're eating in. So we did a study to try to get kids these are elementary school students, to eat and like cauliflower. And we chose cauliflower because when we asked the children which vegetables they liked, it was rated rather low at the beginning of the year. And they hadn't had it before in the target school that we used. So we looked at consumption in the lunchroom of the cauliflower at the beginning and the end of the school year, and also we asked them to rate how much they liked cauliflower at the beginning and the end by interviewing them. I'll I'll just skip to the results. From the beginning to the end of the year, the Eatiquette school had a significant increase in consumption of cauliflower, and the Eatiquette school had a significant increase in liking for the ratings of cauliflower. And that went from rating it a little bad to a really good. Actually, by the end, the children were, this is a sort of family style, so the children were actually fighting over the cauliflower, and often the cauliflower was gone before the adults sat down, so the adults were complaining that they weren't making enough cauliflower. So it was pretty interesting. So here's some numbers. We had a control school. Unfortunately, we had no control over the control school. And so at the end, they didn't serve the cauliflower. So we don't have ending of the year measures there. But if you look at school A, which is the Eatiquette school, at the beginning of the year, in the lunchroom, about a third of the kids ate no cauliflower at all, a third ate some, and a third had seconds or ate a whole, all of that was on their plate. By the end, only 8% of those students ate no cauliflower, 23% ate some, and 69% ate all or were taking seconds. So it was a huge shift. If you look at, this is the mean and standard deviation of, this got a little strange. I like to use my pointer here. If you look just here, the Eatiquette school, at the beginning of the year, the cauliflower was rated a 3. 3 corresponded to a little bad. And at the end, it was rated 1, which was the highest rating they could give it, which was really good. So all of the children that we interviewed actually increased their rating of the cauliflower. So mere exposure is really why you like has been suggested to be why you like the cuisine of your culture. Because you're repeatedly exposed to certain kinds of spicing, they signal that that's a food that you are familiar with, that you like, and if you season something that way, generally people will tend to like it. So one kind of sneaky way to increase mere exposure is just to use seasonings with which the person is familiar, which will add more familiarity to it. Okay, presentation of the food. So this is what a meal looks like in that lunch program that I was talking about, which is something that, frankly, I would pay money to eat for lunch. It's really nice looking. It's served on real plates, and they actually have a little table tent there, so when they come into the lunchroom, they'll see what their meal is going to be for the day, and these little 3rd and 4th graders actually read it, and it's very cute. This is what a typical school lunch looks like, which, frankly, I would not eat. But now, I started doing that. I am not a chef, as you can tell here by my plating skills. So these were studies where we wanted to look to see if how food was plated actually increased liking for the food. So if you made something look attractive, would people tend to like it more? So we used the exact same food. On the top, this is what we were looking at was actually the hummus here, which is the little blob in the middle, okay? And how much they liked that hummus. At the bottom, this is a purchased chicken salad. And I thought this was really a great thing that I did. I was very proud of my plating on this second one. I used a little coffee scoop, and so it was like a little round mound of chicken salad, which I thought was quite attractive. And this was kind of the little mound mushed around. Anyway, so the first study was this hummus study, and I'm really not going to tell you very much about that, except that actually people like the hummus when it was arranged this way and not this way. One of my students said, that's because this one looks like you dropped it on the floor and picked it up and put it back on the plate. So we decided, you know, maybe it's like they think it's contaminated, so we should do something different on attractiveness, and we moved on to the chicken salad. I just want you to look here at the liking scores of the chicken salad. What I use is a 201-point bipolar hedonic scale, ranging from +100, which is the most pleasant taste imaginable, to -100, which is the most unpleasant taste imaginable, 0 being neutral, okay? So you know what the numbers mean. Liking ratings for the neat presentation, that's the nice little lump of chicken salad, the little mound, were 62, 63. And the messy one, which was the chicken salad messed around, was only 32. So it actually had this huge effect. And remember, this is the same thing, a chicken salad, right? And yet, they liked it quite a lot when it was a nice little round mound, and not so much when it wasn't so neat. But I decided I needed help. So I went up to the Culinary Institute of America in Hyde Park, and we actually took over a restaurant on their campus, and I had a real chef make food. And one night, we had people come in to the restaurant. There's a list of people who are interested in any kind of event, so we called them up and said, how would you like a free meal? And guess what? They came. And so we gave them the exact same meal on 2 different nights. One night, it was plated in a traditional style, which was this one, which is basically the protein on the bottom. This is a brown rice pilaf. This is green beans with almonds. And the other night, it was a more creative presentation, which looked more or less like this. Same ingredients, just arranged a bit differently. And we had them rate all the components of the meal and the meal overall. And we got the traditional was always rated lower on how much they liked it than the creative presentation for all of the ingredients and for overall. Of course, the presentation was seen to be more attractive as well. The only place where we did not get a significant difference between the traditional and the creative plating was on green beans, which were just really well liked. I have no idea. We don't know why. The really funny thing was the rice, the brown rice pilaf. So a lot of people don't like the whole grains, right? And we asked people to write comments included in their ratings. Quite a few people said, this is the best, I don't like brown rice, but this is the best brown rice pilaf I've ever eaten, but only when it was creatively plated. So it seems like just by plating something well and making it look attractive, you can actually cause a bit of an increase in how much people like things. Conditioning. A couple people mentioned conditioning. There's a lot of ways to condition people to increase their liking for particular foods. I'm going to talk about generally, what I'm talking about when I'm talking about conditioning is associative learning or Pavlovian conditioning. So that's where you associate 2 stimuli. In the case that I'm talking about, there's the 2 stimuli generally occur together. And there's one stimulus, which is the conditional stimulus, which is, so to speak, neutral. That would be the thing that you're trying to get them to like, whatever it is. It might not be neutral, it might be a little bit unpleasant. And then you have the other stimulus, which is called the unconditional stimulus, which produces a response, in this case, liking. So this is something that is good. And somebody mentioned with caffeine, the caffeine is good, right? People like the effects that it causes, so the taste of the coffee with the drug causes you to like the taste of the coffee. What I'm going to talk about here is what's called flavor conditioning, where you pair a flavor that's not so well liked with a flavor that's well liked, and you find that people start to like the first flavor that wasn't so well liked after a while. So what we used was tea, unsweetened tea. We made funky teas. These were herbal teas, so they were actually Celestial Seasonings teas that we added other flavors to, so they were a little strange. And we had 2 teas. Everybody got 2 teas. They got one tea that always had sugar in it, and they got them in little shot glasses, and they were room temperature, so they were just chugging little cups of tea, and interspersed with another tea that was unsweetened. So one was a CS paired with a good UCS, which is sugar. Everybody likes sweet. We already kind of agreed on that. And here you have a tea which is just presented by itself. They were presented equal numbers of times. And at the end, we had people rate both teas sweetened and both teas unsweetened. So what we found was that the liking rating of the tea that was previously paired with the sugar increased more than the tea never paired with the sugar. And that was true whether they had the teas sweetened or unsweetened. So the tea that had been paired with or had been sweetened in the past, they liked that flavor better plain than they liked the flavor of the tea that didn't have the sugar in it, okay? Now, what's interesting, so this is probably partly what happened, and this was present even after a week, this effect. So they got to like the tea previously paired with the sugar. Similar things probably occur with coffee paired with a good sugar and milk, which is fat. So after drinking sweetened coffee for a while, you should get to like the taste of coffee, which I think happens to at least some people if they dare go off their sweetened, milk-laden coffee. There's a really nice study by Haversman and Jensen, and what they did was they actually pureed vegetables and made like a little different pureed vegetables. They took pureed vegetables that elementary school kids didn't like very much. They paired one of them, they sweetened one of them and presented them with that pureed vegetable sweetened a number of times. And the other one that was about equally disliked, they just presented the same number of times. At the end, they found out that the children tended to like the vegetable that had previously been paired with sugar, even when it was no longer paired with sugar. So you can use sugar to actually increase liking for food without adding sugar forever, right? You can use it to condition liking. So sweetening something isn't necessarily bad because it doesn't have to go on forever. You'll get to like the flavor that it was paired with. Context. Foods are always presented with other foods, rarely or often. Rarely do we eat a food by itself. So when you eat a meal, again, this is my plating, so don't laugh. Rarely do you eat a meal that's one food. So here we have 2 different meals. We have a chicken tender, which is actually a fake chicken tender. Why I'm using that is because I got them for free. And we have two sides that my college students, subjects, said they didn't like, and those were canned red beets and lima beans. And the other one were two side dishes that they said they did like, which was mac and cheese and potato chips. And the question is, how are these two good sides going to influence liking for this protein versus these two bad sides affecting liking for the protein? Now, I have to tell you that, tastes differ. So we only use subjects who disliked the beets and the lima beans, because if not, this wouldn't work. And we only use subjects who liked potato chips and mac and cheese. So what we did was we brought them into the laboratory. We gave them this little meal. They either got this one or they got the good one. And we had them eat it. We let them eat it just like they would eat a normal meal. We then had them rate the side dishes, the not chicken tender, and the overall meal. And this is kind of complicated. Just look at the mean sides. So generally, they disliked the bad sides and they liked the good sides. That's good, because that means we have a study. Okay. The big question is, what did having two good sides or two bad sides do to how much they liked the tender? And what you see is when they had the two bad sides, they really liked the chicken tender, the non-chicken tender. And when they liked the goods, or when they had the good sides, they didn't like it as much. So you get what is called hedonic contrast. Hedonic contrast is where you have a food that is really good and you're comparing it to something that's less good, and it makes the less good food worse. And vice versa, right? If you're giving something with a bad food, it'll make the better food even better. In the lunchroom, we actually ran into, inadvertently, we did this study. We had these elementary school kids eating kale, believe it or not, raw kale salad. They loved it. They were eating it. I couldn't believe it. And this was their menu right on that day. So they had chicken, chickpea curry, pita bread, kale salad, appleberry medley, and milk. When I first started working with this group, the appleberry medley was served after they had eaten the rest of the meal as a dessert course. During the middle of the year, the USDA lunchroom lady came from Harrisburg, this is in Philadelphia, and said we couldn't do that anymore. We had to serve all the components of the meal together at the same time by law. And I said, okay, that's gonna really kill the kale. And so we had luckily observed a day of kale consumption when the fruit was served after the main course, and then we had an identical day, but the fruit was served with the main course. And we recorded the vegetable consumption. And here's what we got, not surprisingly. When the dessert was after the rest of the meal, 55% ate all of their kale or had seconds. 45% ate some of the kale, and nobody ate none of the kale. Look what happens when the dessert, the appleberry medley, was served at the same time, right? Suddenly, 40% of the kids aren't eating any kale. Why not? Well, why would you eat kale when you can eat appleberry medley? right? And so they're comparing the two things. It was very funny watching them because they were so used to having the dessert afterwards. And they're going, no, you shouldn't eat it now, right? And then they're like trying to get, and it's like then they just went for it. You know, there's only so much restraint a third grader has. So, but anyway, it was huge. I also did some research looking at the components of a meal and how they influence one another. So it's really good that we eat dessert last, given how sweet it is and delicious. What we were interested in was the fact that when I go out, I'm often very disappointed by my main course, right? So I get this like appetizer, which is just lovely and wonderful, and then I get my main course and I'm disappointed, and I wanted to know why that was true. So I did this with some people at Drexel, and they have a culinary program, so the chef, again, actually made this food. I didn't, luckily. So we had 2 appetizers. It's very hard to get chefs to make untasty things, but he made an average tasting bruschetta, which had like dried herbs and winter tomatoes, you know, those hard, kind of not so great ones. And then one that had really nice fresh tomatoes and fresh herbs, and it was very nice. So again, we had people come in for a free meal, and they came in and they had one of the 2 bruschettas, and then everybody had the same pasta with oil, garlic, and parsley flakes. And after they ate, there's the, I don't know if you can see it, but that's what this is the kind of average bruschetta, and this is the nice one. And that was what everybody got, the pasta. So the people who got the better bruschetta rated it as better. That's good. Then not all that much, but there was a significant difference there. But look what happened to how much they rated they liked the pasta. If they got the average bruschetta, they still liked the pasta. It wasn't the greatest in the world, but it was still on the positive side of the Hedonic scale. If they got the really, really good bruschetta, the pasta was rated terribly, right? They actually disliked it. This is my man. Gustav Fechner knew everything, like over 100 years ago. So research could have ended at that point. Anyway, what he said was that he wrote a book on aesthetics. That which gives pleasure gives more pleasure the more it enters into contrast with sources of displeasure or of lesser pleasure, and a corresponding proposition holds for that which gives displeasure. The 2 factors had to bear a certain resemblance to one another. So basically, you compare things that you see as going together. And if something is really good, you rate something that's less good as worse. I am going to have to speed through these. You can change how people compare things by suggesting things to them about how similar things are, and people differ in how they perceive things as belonging together. So here we told people that 2 dilute fruit juices were either juices, just like the good ones, the 8 good ones they got beforehand, or we told them that the last 2 were commercial drinks and they weren't at all like the really good fruit juices that they had gotten. So those 2 dilute juices were not as good. So what happens is when you tell them, so the context solutions, of course, are the good juices, and they were similarly rated. But if you so they're very good. If you tell them that they're all juices, the dilute ones that are less good are rated really negatively. If you tell them that they're just a commercial drink, you don't see the same degree of hedonic contrast. Same thing happens with people who think of regular and specialty coffees as being the same. If they have a really good specialty coffee, then their canned coffee is rated as negative. That would be group similar. Group S. Here, their specialty coffee is very much liked. A regular canned coffee is still liked, just not as much. So you get this into the negative hedonic contrast. The same thing with beer, by the way. So those look pretty much similar. Okay, my take home. So there's a number of different ways that you can actually increase liking for healthy foods that might be not so palatable as other foods. Find ways to increase exposure to the healthy foods. Find ways to pair healthy foods with flavors that are already liked, so you could add some sweetener. Not forever, but at least for a while. Make foods look attractive and appealing. Be aware of presenting very hedonically positive foods with or prior to less tasty, healthy foods. And change how people think about foods. So snack foods, my elementary school kids love to bring in the little packets of Doritos and those types of things. They think of them as lunch foods because their parents pack them with the lunch. If they're thought of as being a snack food and not as something you eat at lunch or not as something you eat at dinner, then they're not going to compete with the less good tasting foods that they're getting in the school lunchroom. These are my student and colleague collaborators. And thank you.
We have time for one question. Any? Great.
Hey, thank you. Linda Bobroff, University of Florida. I'm curious with the dessert experiment, how much dessert did they give them? Because I brought my son up with Ellen Satter's approach that, put a small dessert, a cookie or whatever, on the plate and let him decide when to eat what. And he would take a bite of a cookie or whatever and have some broccoli and have some meat. And he didn't know it was supposed to be better. It was sweeter, but did they give them too much dessert that they weren't,
So this was a family-style service. So a bowl of the appleberry medley actually came to the table. And so what they did was they kind of took that and didn't take from the kale container. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.